Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to unpack one of the most consequential and frankly tragic border drawings in modern history, the 1947 partition of India. You see, this wasn't just the birth of two new nations. It triggered unimaginable human suffering and set the stage for geopolitical tensions that literally still threaten global security today. To really grasp why the Indian subcontinent is fractured the way it is right now, we've got to look at the historical timeline, the deep ideological divides, and the absolute administrative chaos of how it all actually went down. To understand the sheer scale of this event, we have to start with a shocking fact. 5 weeks. That's it. 5 weeks was all the time given to carve two new nations out of a single, massive British colony. I mean, just think about the complexity of untangling centuries of shared infrastructure, culture, and communities, and then squeezing all of that into a timeline that's shorter than a typical summer break. It's almost unbelievable. And the sheer impossibility of this task was handed to one man, Cyril Radcliffe. In the summer of 1947, this British lawyer arrived in India to chair the boundary commissions for Punjab and Bengal. But here is the kicker. He had never even visited India before. He had zero prior experience drawing borders. He was armed with nothing but outdated census data and incredibly inaccurate maps. And the boundary he hastily drew up under these impossible conditions, that became known as the Radcliffe Line. So, rewinding the clock a bit, how exactly did we get here? The truth is, this catastrophic border wasn't just drawn out of thin air in 1947. The idea for it had been brewing for decades. Looking at this timeline, we're going to chart the step-by-step political breakdown. We'll start with early demands for constitutional safeguards back in 1929, watch the whole ideology shift in 1930, see the formal demand for separation in 1940, and finally arrive at that fractured subcontinent in 1947. Let's start with 1929 and the demand for political safeguards. In the late 1920s, India was gripped by growing political tension. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was actually once known as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity, felt that Muslim interests were being systematically sidelined in the negotiations for India's future. You can see the direct contrast right here. The 1928 Nehru Report was drafted as a constitutional framework for India, but it outright rejected key Muslim demands. Feeling totally betrayed, Jinnah countered in 1929 with his 14 points. He firmly demanded the continuation of separate electorates and strong provincial autonomy. Basically, he wanted to safeguard minority rights in a Hindu-majority setup. And these 14 points were a highly comprehensive roadmap. They were meticulously designed to guarantee Muslims a real voice in India's future governance, covering everything from provincial autonomy to a mandatory one-third share in the central legislature. But the Indian National Congress ultimately rejected these points as divisive, and British officials kind of used these disagreements to maintain their own leverage. So the political gap just kept widening. Which brings us to 1930, and a massive ideological shift. Because those political disagreements just couldn't be bridged through constitutional tweaks, a huge philosophical shift happened just a year later. The conversation moved from asking for political safeguards within a united India to questioning the very concept of a united India altogether. This was driven largely by Allama Muhammad Iqbal, a deeply respected poet and philosopher. During his presidential address to the All India Muslim League at Allahabad in 1930, he provided this incredibly lucid explanation of the inner feelings of the Muslim community at the time. He didn't just define the Muslims of India as a minority group anymore, he defined them as a distinct nation. Iqbal proposed that peace was really only possible if Muslim-majority units were given privileges under a federal system. He explicitly named Punjab, the Northwest Frontier Province, Baluchistan, and Sindh, suggesting they unite as a self-governed unit. In doing so, he planted the exact ideological seed that would eventually grow into the demand for Pakistan. Let's jump ahead a decade to 1940 and the Lahore Resolution. Fast forward 10 years, and a volatile political climate, coupled with some pretty bitter experiences under Congress rule in the late 1930s, hardened these philosophical ideas into uncompromising demands. The abstract idea was suddenly becoming a concrete political goal. During a historic 3-day session at Minto Park in Lahore, the Muslim League officially adopted the Lahore Resolution. Presented by A.K. Fazlul Huq, the Chief Minister of Bengal, this document explicitly rejected the concept of a united India. Instead, it called for geographically contiguous Muslim-majority areas in the northwestern and eastern zones to be grouped together to constitute independent, autonomous, and sovereign states. At that very session, Jinnah argued passionately that yoking together two distinct civilizations under a single state one as a numerical minority and the other as a majority, would inevitably lead to growing discontent and final destruction. This right here is what became known as the two-nation theory. By 1940, the demand for a separate homeland wasn't just a fringe idea anymore. It was the official platform. Now we hit 1947. Execution and catastrophe. By this point, World War II had severely drained the British Empire financially, leading them to plan a very hasty withdrawal. This left Cyril Radcliffe to execute the separation in, again, just 5 weeks. When his line was finally published, his decision satisfied absolutely no one. In fact, they infuriated everyone. For instance, he assigned the Chittagong Hill Tracts to Pakistan even though the population there was 97% non-Muslim. He awarded Firozpur and Gurdaspur to India, decisions that were heavily clouded by accusations of political interference from Lord Mountbatten to secure water rights and a land corridor to Kashmir for India. Centuries of shared culture were clumsily reduced to a line on a map. And the moment the Radcliffe Line was announced on August 17, 1947, the consequences were immediate. 15 million, that's the estimated number of people displaced virtually overnight. Hindus and Sikhs desperately fled Pakistan for India, while Muslims moved in the exact opposite direction. To this day, it remains one of the largest forced migrations in modern history. It's almost impossible to truly quantify a tragedy of this magnitude. Entire communities were just uprooted overnight, and the administrative capacity of these brand new governments was completely overwhelmed. This massive vacuum led to horrifying cycles of revenge bloodshed among Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims. Cities like Lahore and Amritsar saw mass killings, leaving a staggering death toll estimated between 200,000 and 2 million people. Let's look at the disastrous legacy of all this. You see, the tragedy of the Radcliffe Line isn't just stuck in the past. It's a living history. It left open wounds that continue to define the geopolitical reality of South Asia right now. This hastily drawn border severed critical irrigation and railway infrastructure that communities had relied on for generations. It also geographically isolated East Pakistan, separated by a full 1,600 kilometers of Indian land, a setup that directly contributed to the horrific 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War. And crucially, the unresolved status of the princely state of Kashmir sparked an immediate war in 1947 and subsequent wars in 1965 and 1999. Even today, millions of families remain permanently separated. Decades later, the hostility born from a line drawn in 5 weeks has escalated dramatically. The border between India and Pakistan is now one of the most heavily militarized frontiers on Earth. And because both nations possess nuclear weapons, a rivalry that was originally sparked by colonial haste now carries global, existential stakes. Which leaves us with this final thought to consider as we wrap up this explainer. We've traced these ideas all the way from 1929 to the hasty lines of 1947 and the ongoing fallout today. How does a line drawn in 5 weeks by a complete stranger continue to define the lives, the deep-seated conflicts, and the nuclear tensions of over 1 billion people today? It's a truly stark reminder of the enduring, monumental impact of history on our modern world, and why understanding the roots of these borders is absolutely crucial for us today.